Does talking about your money make you cringe? Are you tired of fighting about finances? Do you want to stop sabotaging your financial happiness? Then you are in the right place. Welcome to Breaking Money Silence, a podcast series aimed at helping all of us talk more openly about money. Your host, Kathleen Kingsbury, is doing what she does best. As a young girl, she was scolded for talking too much to her neighbors in class. After years of trying to be quiet, she discovered that speaking up about taboo topics is her strength. International speaker, author, and founder of KBK Wealth Connection, Kathleen understands money and our relationship with it. She is a wealth psychology expert who has helped thousands of advisors and clients communicate more effectively about money. Now, listen to Kathleen as she assists today's guest in busting their favorite money myth wide open.
I am so excited to have my friend Dori join the call today. Dr. Dorian Mitzer is her official name. I call her Dori. She has over 40 years of clinical experience. She's definitely an experienced therapist. She's the co-author of the book, The Couple's Retirement Puzzle, an executive coach, a consultant, a speaker, a writer. She's done wonderful work. Her area of expertise is in adult development, holistic life planning, and positive psychology. And so she has combined her life experience with these areas of expertise, and it's really led to her passion for helping individuals and couples navigate, in quotes, the second half of life. She works with individuals and couples in person in Boston and Brookline, that's Massachusetts, or via the phone or Skype if you are not in the New England area. Dori has done a variety of great things, and so her work has been featured in different publications, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN Money, NPR, ABC, Evening News, and the Today Show. Please welcome Dori to the call. Hi, Dori. How's it going?
Just great. Thank you so much, Kathleen. I'm just delighted to be part of your call today. So thank you for inviting me.
Excellent, because I know the myth we're going to be talking about today are couples don't need to talk about money. And especially, I know that this comes up when there is one member of the couple who tends to manage the finances. And I know, thinking back to the first time I met you for a lunch in Boston, and I was new to this whole field, it's such an honor to have you on Breaking Money Silence podcast today, kind of figuring out how to bust this myth wide open. So let's start with the myth, right? Couples don't need to talk about money is the shorthand of it. Tell me what motivated you to pick this myth.
Well, there are a couple of things. On a personal level, it was really watching my parents and just seeing how, as they aged, they were not talking about money. My father was the one who handled the money. There had been, as I grew up, a lot of money fights. My father was more frugal. My mother liked to spend money. And so when she started working, she would buy things and then hide them. So I grew up, knowing about money messages and personality styles. And as they got older, we actually did sit down and talk about end-of-life issues. So I knew what was important to them. And it was made clear to me that my father handled everything, my mother didn't. And that was just perfectly fine. And then, of course, when he died, it was a time of crisis for my mother. And I really realized in just a deeper way the financial illiteracy that she had. And it's part of what really got me interested in money and psychology and couples and women around money. And in my clinical work, I'm just a big believer that people need to talk. But a lot of times people say, well, he handles it or she handles it and we don't need to talk. And part of what motivated the book that I co-authored were studies coming out of Fidelity, particularly Fidelity at that point. I think other places now have done studies saying couples are not talking about finances. And I think it's crucial because if it doesn't mean both have to handle the finances, but it's important to talk about so at least you even just know the right questions to ask.
Excellent. Absolutely. And so, and people who listen to this broadcast, Breaking Money Silence podcast, as well as who know my previous work, know that, of course, I believe that it's important for couples to talk about money. But let me just go back just a little bit to your story. So when you talked about mom and dad and you talked about end of life issues, what's interesting to me is somebody initiated that conversation. Was it your father? Was it your mother? Or was it you as their adult child saying, we need to have a conversation about this?
Well, it came from a couple of parts. I mean, I had been somebody constantly talking with them about what's next and trying to help them really think more intentionally about where they were going to move because they were making some not good decisions. My father actually initiated the sitting down to talk because he knew he was dying. Okay. And I am so thankful that he initiated it because my brother was visiting out there, I was there, and it was interesting. My brother's response was, "No, we don't need to talk about this." And I said, "Yes, we do." And so we sat down and talked about, the end of life issues and wishes. And my father told us that, and he told us where the list was of his accounts. Now, we didn't know at that point that my father took literally this idea of diversifying. And we discovered after he died there were so many accounts and, little bits here and little bits there. And so at least we knew that, and we knew account numbers, and we knew where things were. But after he died, it's a time of crisis, and it was just clear my mother did not want to deal with anything. And luckily, during that conversation, I had put my name, I went to the bank with them, and I got my name on the checking things. My brother, we sort of divvied up some of the things that we were going to help with. And so luckily we were able to help manage things. But, the hard reality is if you haven't talked, if you don't know what the accounts are, where they are, who the potential financial planner is, what the passwords are, it's really difficult at a time of crisis to have to deal with all of these things. So it's actually an act of love to talk about it. And I know you and I think similarly, Kathleen. I think money, sex, and death have been the taboos that, are in our particular culture and society. And, it's important to break those taboos. They're important to talk about, and you actually can get closer.
Absolutely. And so, it's interesting to me and not surprising, but I'm really glad that your dad gave your family that gift, is that it sounds like he could engage in a money talk, but only when it was crisis, when he knew he was no longer going to be with you. And so you were able to kind of parlay that and then realize, wow, mom and dad haven't really talked about money. And so this is putting my mother at a disadvantage. So when we think about any myth, or when I think about any myth, I also think about, okay, so in a minute, we'll talk about how it got in your mom's way, maybe how it caused some problems for your family. But is there any way in which it might have been helpful to your mom or helpful to people that are in partnerships that say, you know what, if I handle the finances, I don't need to talk about money with my partner? Is there any way that's useful?
To be honest, I don't think that it is. And I'll tell you why. Okay. I mean, I think it can work for people, and there's no question that often in relationships there's a division of labor. And somebody's the more the financial, the other person's the more social, however it gets divided. But personally, and I see this as as you said, I've over 40 years of clinical experience. When people don't talk, then there's almost like this blind faith, and it doesn't empower you to feel like you can think about and make some decisions. And I often have seen power struggles around money. And it doesn't mean you have to talk in depth. I mean, I'm a believer it's fine for one person to be the person who handles the finances. But I think what's important is what I have seen, let's just say it's the man who handles the finances. I know that's a stereotype because it's not always that way, and it's changing, I think, in the current in our current times. But if the wife doesn't know anything about it, there's almost like this blind faith that it's all going to be fine. And I have seen so many clients having heightened anxiety because they just don't know how much money there is or where it is. And, now we live in a society where there are more second marriages, third marriages, blended families. And so issues about money, family responsibility, legacy, the financial piece of legacy, philanthropy, they're important things to talk about. And what I see is when there's not discussions, there can be some anxiety of just not knowing. And also, for too many women, it can stir up a feeling like I'm not capable of understanding
absolutely.
it. And
yes.
I think that's not helpful at all.
Well, and I think it can also work in the reverse. I mean, you've said this, that it's a stereotype that it's just the men, and certainly, right. Historically it's been the case, and that's shifting. But I do think whether it's a man or a woman, and if there's, somebody taking care of the finances but not discussing it, there is a way in which there's this unspoken message that somehow the other person's input wouldn't be valuable. And even if you aren't a financial expert or finance is not your quote unquote thing, your perspective can be useful. So what I'm hearing is that you believe in the division of labor, but that the lines of communication need to be open. You don't see an upside of not talking about it.
Absolutely. And I think communication is the key issue. I think many couples are afraid that if they bring up this Pandora's box of money, there's going to just be huge fights. And what I often say to people is, if in fact you haven't been talking about whether it be money or other important things, and one of you wants to begin talking about it, the initial response might be trying to make you feel guilty, like, how come now? You're suddenly interested, or why do you want to talk about it? Do you want me dead? I had one situation where that was the response. Or being angry, how come now? You haven't been interested all along. I always like the image of a pebble dropped in the water. So if you're trying to make a change, you're like the pebble, and there's a ripple effect. And so the immediate response when somebody's trying to make a change, most generally, is either to make you feel guilty or to get angry at you, because people really don't like change. And when they get angry or try to make you feel guilty, usually the message is, don't change, don't make me change. But if you just hold firm in a gentle but firm way, generally you're able to kind of make a change in the system and begin to talk about some of these issues.
So it sounds like it's really at the beginning, expect that there might be some sort of pushback, just if it's a new behavior for the couple, but that ultimately what I'm hearing is that in the long run, if you stay the course, it can improve your communication. It also, you alluded to this earlier, about increasing intimacy. So I love the idea of like people don't like change. I really don't know many people, even people who say, "Oh, I love change." Right. Usually we love change that we're in control of, is what my experience has been. Right. So if it's my decision to change, it's great. If it's your decision in the couplehood to change, I may not be so happy about it. But I think that's really useful advice for people who are listening. That if there is pushback, if someone gets angry or starts to use some guilty tactics, it may be that they're just afraid of doing something new if this has been or seeming to have worked for the couple. Is that your sense of it, Dori?
Absolutely. And I think it's very important for people to realize it. So, and again, I don't think you want to necessarily kind of put it in somebody's face. I think there's some ways to bring up conversations. And what I often like to suggest to people is you start with an I statement and avoid what are called you statements. And let me give you an example. So an I statement is, I really want us to sit down and just take a little time to talk about some of the money situations that, we have, or just for me to at least know, kind of what the money situation is or how much money we have or, whatever the specific question is, rather than start with, you never share anything about money with me. Even if your intention is not blaming and shaming, a you statement tends to make somebody defensive and feel attacked. I don't think any of us like to be told, you make me do such and such. So if you bring it up in an I way, I really would like to talk about it. Let's set up a time. And if people haven't been talking, I say just set up a time, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, because you can always come back to it. And just say, let's set up a time, at dinner or after dinner, or let's take a walk, and set a time limit on it. Turn off all the distractions and really work on listening to each other. And, I don't think any of us are born good listeners. I think that in different fields, like I know in my career as both a therapist and a coach, as well as a teacher, you need to learn to listen. And I think what tends to happen, particularly if people have been together for a while, we can hear the first few words and then just assume we know where it's going. And so we kind of turn off the hearing and we're already thinking about what we want to say. Or we're interpreting it. We're not really just listening. So I really encourage people to listen without interrupting. Try not to make assumptions.
I'm going to just jump in because my brain's going in two different ways, Dori. Okay. So as a professional, right, as a coach, a speaker, teacher, very similar to the work that you do, I am trained to listen. And in that space, I'm a good listener. Mm-hmm. And then I'm thinking about, just over the weekend, a recent conversation with my husband about money and spending, because we have a couple of different projects we're working on. And boy, I quickly get into that wife mode of automatically assuming, well, I know that this is what you think, and having all sorts of prejudged thoughts about it. So the reason I'm sharing that is I think it's important for us to have a sense of humor when we're doing this as well, because we're not perfect in it. And if it was a coaching client, I would be an excellent listener. As a wife, I really still, after 20 years, have to work at, I'm listening. I'm hearing his perspective. I'm putting myself in his shoes. And it sounds like those are the types of tips that you're offering people. So what happens if your partner doesn't want to come along for the ride? I mean, I'm fortunate. Brian's come along for the ride in terms of talking about money, even though we didn't always do it. But there are some couples that just really, really continue to struggle when one person wants to have this conversation and the other person doesn't. And I'm sure you run into that. So help me with your expertise, understand what is someone to do if that's the case in their life?
Well, it's not always easy, but there are some ways. And I just wanted to finish a thought, too, of appreciate what you're hearing, even if you don't agree, so that, it's often helpful. But I think, it's sort of like a dance. One person kind of leads a little, and maybe the other person will follow, and maybe they won't. But, if in fact the person won't, and let's assume it's the person who doesn't want to talk is the one who handles the investments and maybe has talked with a financial advisor, maybe has not. Another way is to say, all right, well, I do understand that it's not something you want to talk with me about, but I really would like to come to the next appointment, or let's set up an appointment with whoever the financial planner is, because my anxiety is just getting too high and not knowing. And I either would like to do that with you, or I want to be able to get the name of the person that you've spoken to, if you have, and maybe I can set up a time of my own. So that might be a way. The money piece is difficult if, in fact, all of the money is together. I even remember years ago I gave a talk at Boston Securities, and a lovely gentleman came up to me at the end and said, I have another story to share with you, because I was sharing stories of couples not talking, and he said that he had worked for many, many years with a gentleman who always came to the financial meetings by himself, and he met with the wife after this man had died. And he asked her, well, tell me, sort of what you understand about the finances, and were there ever any conversations? And so she said, what he did, he would bring home the taxes, and cover everything up and say, sign here.
Oh, wow.
That's an extreme.
Right.
But, and one would wish that you don't have to wait until after your partner or spouse has died to be able to get some clarity. But, and you might know better because I know you do a lot of work with financial planners, Kathleen, and around couples and women. And
what I like about what you're saying, though, Dori, is I really like the idea of a third person. So whether that is a financial advisor, whether that's a banker, whether that's an estate attorney, a therapist like yourself, or a coach, I think having that other person in the room can shift the dynamics, and also explaining, like you said, explaining how it's impacting you. And often, even though that person who, for whatever reason, wants to keep the money and control of the money and managing it, could be because they have a loving intent to protect you. It could be that it's about something else. But really helping them understand how it might be helpful for you often will, and let them know you still can call the shots, so to speak, but I just want to know what's happening. And so I really like that as a tip of getting somebody else in the mix. Now, you said, and I know these things go so quick, so we're going to have to wind down in a minute, but I don't want to lose sight of this, because you said part of what we should do, or the tips you offered, was I statements, really listening, and then appreciating the other person. Can you give me a concrete example of how you would appreciate a partner in a money conversation?
So if a couple were, part of what I encourage couples to do is to talk together about how was money handled as you were growing up? Because sometimes that just sets the frame of being able, rather than just jumping into the conflict now, and people can be kind of in their polarized position. I encourage couples to share what it was like growing up. How was money talked about? Was there fighting about it? How was it handled as you were growing up as a member of the family? And I think that often talking about it, and even thinking about, like, what does money mean to you? And it helps couples begin to talk about, so the man might be able to say, it's a feeling of power, and I don't want to give that up. Now, not all people will say that, but some do, and others say it's security, or others say it's love, and and it can help couples begin to see maybe this is a little bit of the kind of mismatch that happens. We always attract opposites, or complementary, or we don't always see eye to eye, but sometimes it's a way to sort of appreciate, like, I didn't really understand why this is so important to you. And I am fine with the fact that you control the money, but I don't want to feel controlled by you around that. And so there could be a way of being able to talk about it that way.
I like that distinction between needing or wanting to control the money versus feeling controlled by the partner. That there's a difference,
right?
And so I think these are wonderful tips. I mean, you're out there every day, and you have been for a number of years, helping to break money silence, helping couples talk about a variety of things, but certainly about money as well. And I know you're up to a lot of good stuff. So anybody who's listening in, I want to make sure that you can find out where Dori is doing her trainings, or when she's out at a conference speaking, how you can find her. So Dori, you want to tell them a little bit about how they can find you? And I know you have some things coming up that you wanted to just mention.
Sure. My website is www.revolutionizedretirement.com. And it's not specifically about retirement. As Kathleen said at the beginning, retirement is part of the transition often, or sometimes that's part of second half of life, but I work with people basically figuring out what's next. How do I want to live my life with purpose and meaning and connection and engagement? So if you go to my website, you'll learn about me, and I also have a free monthly webinar, which is on the fourth Tuesday of each month at 12 noon Eastern Time. And you have to sign up the week before each of the calls. And I interview experts. I call it Revolutionize Your Retirement. Interview with experts to help you create a fulfilling second half of life. And once you sign up, you'll get a recording. So if you can't be on the call live, you'll still get a recording from the call. So I invite all of you. It's open to professionals and the public. So, I hope you will come and join and tell friends and colleagues about it. And I've also co-authored a book called The Couple's Retirement Puzzle, 10 Must-Have Conversations for Creating an Amazing New Life Together. And although written for couples, because studies were saying couples aren't talking, it's actually helpful for individuals because you need to think about what your own vision is before you can work on trying to create a shared vision with either a spouse, a partner, or whoever's important in your life. So I just encourage you to maybe pick up a copy of the book. And on my website, you'll see there are about 6 or 7 other books that I've contributed essays to, some really helpful books. One is called Live Smart After 50, and it's 33 contributors from the Life Planning Network, and there are a number of other books. You can kind of find them on the website. So I want to encourage you to kind of check it out.
Definitely check out her work. And I'm giggling here because I realized when I first met Dori, it was over a decade ago, and some of these books didn't apply to me. And now they do. But I can tell you that Expert Series is wonderful. I have had the fortune to be able to speak on it. I've also had a chance to listen into some of the folks who are highlighted and really interesting, diverse group of people. And her book is on every reference list that I give out about couples and money. And I do agree. I think the really thought-provoking questions, good information. Always fun to speak with you, Dori. And definitely I want everybody to check out revolutionizeretirement.com and keep track of what Dori's up to because she's always up to some interesting stuff. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's been a pleasure being part of this, and I hope people will kind of break their silences about some of these money taboos.
Yes, and certainly you are, thank you. You are someone who is breaking money silence and certainly has joined the Breaking Money Silence revolution. So I appreciate it. Until next time, I hope everybody can take a step towards talking about money openly and honestly with someone in their life. This is Kathleen Burns Kingsbury. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Breaking Money Silence, hosted by Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, a wealth psychology expert and founder of KBK Wealth Connection. If you like what you heard, then check out more podcasts at breakingmoneysilence.com or subscribe on iTunes.com. Need a fun, engaging speaker for your next event? Go to kbkwealthconnection.com and find out how to book Kathleen today. Be sure to share today's show so together we can break money silence for good.